Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries RPG podcast with John and Hannah.
Hi.
And today, as per the result of our Twitter poll for this Friend or Foe Friday episode, we're going to be looking at the Mephit. Okay, so as per our introduction, we're going to be looking at the Mephit, which first appeared in the Fiend Folio by TSR UK, which is the book that we're working our way through at the moment. Now, if I remember correctly, love, they were sort of like an imp, but sort of like elementally aspected. So what does it say about them in the Fiend Folio?
So, for starters, it's one of the few creatures from this book that we've got like 4 variations of that are distinct variations.
Okay.
We've got fire, lava, smoke, steam.
Yeah, and I seem to remember that sort of like later on down the line in later editions, there's some more different types added as they expanded, like the elemental planes, but we'll get to that later. So what else does it say?
Mephits are evil messengers and errand runners of powerful creatures of the lower planes. So, they're
Demons and devils.
Yeah. So, yeah, they're common inhabitants of 9 hells to the abyss, and their alignments vary depending on which plane they're from, but they're always evil.
That makes sense, because the abyss is chaotic evil and the 9 hells is lawful evil.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember correctly.
When they appear on the prime material plane, they always have some demonic mission to perform, or a similar mission from another such evil personage. So they're always there for a reason.
So they've been sent to do something particular. They're not just knocking
demon
about.
That's been summoned for a task.
Okay.
Mephits are connoisseurs of the vulgar and tasteless. They share an extraordinary twisted sense of humour.
I like them already.
They delight particularly in tormenting the helpless. They will wear clothes of the most garish design possible. They are often seen puffing upon smoking rolls of exceedingly foul-smelling dried vegetation.
That's disgusting.
Stuttering gait, shrill voices. They're all about 5 foot tall with functional wings and fangs. No particular type is any more or less common on any of the other planes.
Alright, okay.
For purposes of aerial combat, manoeuvrability class B, and then it goes on to the different types.
Are there any sort of like powers or abilities that are common to them, or?
So they've all got a breath weapon. We've got a handy little box out with all of them next to each other. Yeah, they've all got a breath weapon, which I think is particular to whichever one it is. So, yeah, the steam one gets a steam breath weapon, the smoke one gets a smoke breath weapon.
Yeah.
And I assume the other 2 are fire. Other than that, they're pretty similar. For some reason, the steam ones are a lot richer than the others. They have 3 to 18 platinum pieces, where the others have either 1 to 10 or 2 to 12.
Obviously, steam pays. Who'd have thought it? Now, I seem to remember that a lot of demons and devils in the sort of earlier editions had the ability to like summon in other demons and devils of the same type. Do Mephits have that ability, or?
Yeah, it's mentioned on each of them individually. I think the reason it's mentioned differently on each one is because they get different frequencies and different chances of success to do it.
Okay.
But they all get this power to port in 1 to 2 other Mephits. And then they also get, for like each individual type, a couple of extra powers. So the fire Mephit can use heat metal and magic missile. The lava one gets shape change to turn into a pool of molten lava.
Nice.
The smoke one gets invisibility and dancing lights. And the steam one gets contaminate, water and ice storm.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so
So at this stage, they're pretty sort of Faustian imps. You summon one, you give it a task. It does the task, it goes back to its own plane. Or the bad guy summons one, gives it a task, it goes back to its own plane.
So pretty cut and dried, to be honest.
Or they've got their own little mission that they've come up with themselves, which seems to be generally trolling people.
Although I do like the whole like wearing ridiculous like clothes and like smoking and having like high pitched voices. For some reason, I don't know. In my mind, it just makes me think of them as like the Blackadder of like demons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're like they want to be evil and they want to be bad, but they're more sort of comical rather than sort of hardcore like evil.
They made me think very much of the demons in The Young Ones. Do you remember the sequence where they have to say the demon's name 3 times and it'll appear?
I don't.
And the demon's called Footumch, and no one's going to say that 3 times. And then over the course of the episode, obviously they do, and the demon turns up and starts tormenting them at the end of the episode.
I tell you what it makes me think of when they're saying about the high-pitched voice. You know that that voice like Chris Kronos does when he's doing like tribute? Where he's like, play the best song in the world. That's what it reminds me of. Anyway, our sort of wandering ramblings aside, that's first edition AD&D. Now, they did crop up in second edition AD&D in the Fiendish Monstrous Compendium. I seem to remember they also appeared in some capacity in the Planescape Monstrous Compendium that I once owned a copy of, but alas, I don't have that any longer, so I can't really check that. I've checked it online enough to know that it is in there, but obviously I haven't got a copy of it to hand. However, the Fiendish Monstrous Compendium I have got a copy of, and having a quick look at it here, in this version we get fire, ice, lava, mist, smoke and steam Mephits. They're described as nasty little messengers created by powerful lower planes creatures. So in this case it's giving you, like we've said before with a lot of second AD&D stuff, it's expanding on it a bit. It's now demons and devils of powerful status create these creatures as messengers, so they've got a defined role. They appear as thin, 5-foot-tall humanoids with wings. They have exaggerated features, hooked noses, pointy ears, blah, blah, blah. Their skin...
Got a bit taller there.
Well, you know, it's that's inflation for you. Their skin continually drips with whatever material they're made from, so lava, water for like steam methods and whatever. In battle, they attack with either their clawed hands or their breath weapons. They've still got the breath weapon there. They're described as loving, tormenting, helpless creatures, so they're still sort of quite sadistic and bragging about their latest evil accomplishments. So again, as I said, it sounds to me like they're trying to be like really hardcore sort of evil bad guys, but they're just not really. Mm-hmm. There's still a thing about them wearing garish, vulgar costumes, being fond of large cigars and pipes, smoking foul-smelling tobacco and pipe weed. They give themselves pompous, impossibly long names, and the one example given here is Gon Ben Arthel, Sprite Slayer, greatest of all the steam Mephits and favourite of the lower planes, which, you know, try saying that 3 times fast. They assume a grovelling, craven attitude around their bosses, towards victims and each other. They drop the servant persona and they become sort of like self-aggrandising, sort of over-the-top, sort of arrogant figures. They're usually assigned to deliver some message or pick up a package on the lower planes, but occasionally, it says about 5% of the time, they're sent to the prime material planes. Their missions might include retrieving a person, delivering a magical item, spreading a little general mayhem, that sort of thing. So again, we're still keeping that idea going from the Fiend Folio that they're given a defined mission rather than just being something you come across. We've got a little bit of ecology here, which describes them as leading brief, troublesome lives, since it seems to suggest that the effort to create one of them is relatively minor for like an archdevil or like a big demon. So like they're created and destroyed fairly frequently because I suppose if one gets stranded somewhere or in too much trouble, it's easy just to create a new one rather than like bail them out. For some bizarre reason here, it says as well, captured and confined ice Mephits have been used to chill small rooms for cold storage or perishables. So like a refrigerator which seems a bit strange. It then goes on to say steam Mephits can heat small areas or power engines. Fire and lava Mephits can prove useful for heating forges and such things. So we're getting into the sort of like magical melding with technology a bit there, where it almost seems to be suggesting that for a lot of things, these little creatures can serve as power sources, really.
Sort of very like Pratchett with the imps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, and I think that's quite interesting. They've sort of gone in that direction. I can't remember many other creatures where it sort of implicitly implies like a certain advancement of technology. Whereas if you're building steam engines that need a steam method, that implies like a certain level of technology. But obviously here, using magic to power it rather than the more sort of traditional methods, which I think is interesting. I know everyone doesn't like sort of technology in the D&D games, but it's a nice interesting wrinkle you can throw in there if you want, and you can ignore it if you don't, let's face it. We then get some little descriptions of the individual Mephits. So we're told that fire Mephits are the most mischievous and they like playing pranks on people. Ice Mephits are angular in form, they're aloof, they're cruel, they're the cruelest of the Mephits, they're very cold, they don't really have any emotions. The lava Mephits are very unintelligent, they're just brutes. The mist Mephits think they're spies of highest caliber, although given that it says they think they are, suggests actually they're a bit rubbish at it. It describes them as being weirdly sort of like a Mephit thought police, where they're like quick to report other Mephits to their boss if they've like stepped out of line, which is, I mean, no one likes a grass, let's face it. And then we've got to the smoke Mephit, who are apparently crude and lazy. They spend most of the time sitting around smoking, not doing a lot. And then we've got the steam Mephits, who regard themselves as the overlords of all Mephits and the highest of all Mephits. But again, since it says that that's how they regard themselves, suggests they're not. And they have similar powers. You know, they've all got breath weapons. They can gate in other types of Mephits that are related to them. One of the interesting additions here, which I don't know if it mentions in the Fiend Folio, is it gives you a little bit here about what happens when they die. So, for instance, when a smoke Mephit dies, it disappears in a flash of flame, but like a big puff of smoke, which might cause like 1 point of damage to people within like 10 foot.
No, it doesn't seem to have anything about that specifically in here.
I mean, it doesn't mention that for all the different types of Mephits in the Monstrous Compendium, but it's an interesting little extra
nice
bit of
touch.
like flavour, yeah. You know, just a little bit more dramatic, isn't it? So I think after the Monstrous Compendium, as I say, possibly the Planescape Compendium, which unfortunately I don't have a copy of, I think that the next time they appear is in the 3rd edition and 3.5 edition Monster Manual. So do you want to crack that open, Love, and tell me what that reveals to us about the Mephits?
3.5 Monster Manual. Why are you so difficult to read?
Yeah, I've got to admit, I was never a big fan of the layout of the 3.5 Monster Manual, especially that weird sort of like line background thing.
It's the lines on the background.
Yeah, I don't know what someone was thinking when they put that in.
Well, it's what you would do for calligraphy, which would make sense if it was like a calligraphic text, but it's a really modern text.
Yeah. It's weird because the layout in like the earlier books is quite clear. The layout in the 5th edition book is quite clear. The layout in the 4th edition monster book is quite clear. But it's just like someone had a brain fart on like the 3.5 version and went, oh, lots of sort of like faded lines across the page. That's what we need.
I think they just wanted it to not look like the 2nd edition book with the one monster in the box out in the corner and all the text underneath, because that was such an iconic look. They wanted something different. Serves them right, really. So, anyway.
So what types of Mephit do we get in the...
Minor creatures from the elemental planes, more curious than evil.
Oh, that's a change, isn't it? Because although they're described as pranksters, they are evil, and it specifically says they're evil in the 1st edition.
Each individual's nature varies depending on the essence of the element that birthed it.
Well, water's the essence of wetness.
Small winged creatures, more or less humanoid features. Their elemental origins are apparent at a glance.
One of the things I was going to say I've noticed, sort of like having a quick look over this while you're in, is there's no picture of any type of...
There actually is one, but it's
yeah.
on the next page, and it's of 3 very generic little demons.
Yeah, it's not really grabbing me. I mean, when you look at like the Tony DiTalazzi artwork in the Planescape Monstrous Compendium, and I'm sorry if I've not said his name right, but the artwork in there was stunning, and even the artwork in like the Fiend Folio is like nice in that sort of like old school black and white flavour.
I think again it's suffering from the 3.5 layout thing, because it's following the Manticore and the Medusa, and you've got to have a picture of each of them.
I also think, if I remember correctly, because I can see that a lot of the artwork's been reused from the version 3, between 3 and 3.5. However, the layout's been like moved around.
Just a little bit, I think.
So I'm guessing they probably had to sort of...
since I've compared them.
I'm guessing they probably had to like shrink various pictures and remove some to like fit it all in.
So anyway,
What type of Mephits do we get?
we get the Air Mephit, Dust Mephit, Earth Mephit, Fire Mephit, Ice Mephit, Magma Mephit, Ooze Mephit, Salt Mephit, Steam Mephit, Water Mephit.
So there's definitely been some added there, hasn't there? Because there's like the core elements have been added in, and there's things like ooze have been added in.
So we started off with fire and 3 things that are effectively the other element mixed with fire. Lava is earth and fire, steam is water and fire, smoke is air and fire. And then it's sort of expanded on that principle. You've added in the ice Mephit on the last edition, and this time we've added in a few more. So we've got fire and ice, we've got earth and air. They're like your sort of main ones, and then we've got all these things that mix them together, like dust is air and earth, but magma, obviously lava, fire, water, ooze, water, earth.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is just part of the fact that, like, as the game's gone on, the elemental planes have been developed a little bit more. So as far as I remember, when it first started out, and obviously feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I'm just going on my very rusty memory here. When it first started out, there was like the 4 elemental planes, you know, earth, air, fire, water. Then there was the power elemental planes, which is where the boundaries of those 2 met. And then, if I remember correctly, there was some other ones which were mixed with the positive and the negative planes. Okay, so I've just checked this online, and according to the Great Wheel cosmology, the inner planes were the 6 major elemental planes. So that's fire, earth, water, air, positive energy and negative energy. There's 4 para-elemental planes: smoke, ice, ooze and magma. And the 8 quasi-elemental planes: lightning, steam, radiance, minerals, vacuum, salt, ash and dust. So obviously we've got the quasi-elemental planes are where it mixes with the positive and the negative, and then we've got the para-elemental planes where the others meet.
So each of these has got their own little specifics, but again, we've basically got a breath weapon. They don't seem to have the ability to summon their mates in, or not as many of them do. And then obviously they've got, like, they speak the language for whichever plane they've come from.
Yeah.
Couple of feats, skills that go up and down, because it's 3rd ed and everybody's got loads and loads of skills.
Yeah, 3rd ed is the game of the skills.
Without looking at it all in a proper, neatly laid out chart, I would have no way to tell you how they compare to each other.
It does look like it'd be a big old wodge of text in the 3.5 monster manual. I've got to say, well, as we've just said, it doesn't appeal to me at all as a layout style.
4 whole pages and a little bit, although if you don't count the Medusa that little bit
See,
of Mephit
it
spills
strikes
over.
It strikes me in there's a lotto pages being used, and I'm not getting any clearer point than I got from like the couple used in the Fiend Folio or the second Ed Monstrous Compendio. I mean, I know the stat blocks are bigger.
The nature of the game, because the stat blocks are bigger, although they didn't need to write underneath every single one whatever Mephit is about 4 feet tall and weighs. They could have just said most of them weigh this much and the air and the dust ones weigh less. That's a surprise.
Yeah.
The earth one weighs more.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
What a surprise.
Yeah. But this is not a current edition. There's no point in moaning about the layout too much.
What do you mean there's no point moaning about editions? That's your right as a D&D gamer.
We're still only on 3rd Ed. What was 4th Ed like, love?
Okay, now Mephits didn't actually appear, as far as I'm aware, in any of the sort of published 4th edition books. In order to find a version for 4th Ed of Mephits, I had to turn to the online version of Dragon Magazine. And in the March 2013 issue, there was an article by David Flor and Jared Espley featuring some of the Tony DiTilizzi illustrations from the Planescape version, which told you how you could use them in 4th edition, gave you the stat blocks, the powers, etc. Okay, so we're told that Mephits are common in the elemental chaos, and this is an interesting little aside because obviously 4th edition sort of changed the cosmology of D&D as a whole. So we went from using the Great Wheel cosmology to what was called the World Axis cosmology. And instead of just sort of having all these distinct separate planes, there was the idea of the material plane in the middle, which was your campaign world, some planes being above, some planes being below, and various transitory planes. So the elemental planes all got mashed together into one big plane called the elemental chaos, which was made up out of all various different bits of the elemental planes. And at the bottom, in inverted commas, of that was a huge pit that led down into the abyss, which is where all the demons were. So the elemental planes and demons, for my money, were a lot more closely tied together using the cosmology of 4th edition. So that makes sense for the Mephit. You know, the little demons, they're elemental. That seems to work great for me. They're described as having a natural sort of craven sort of style to them. They're sort of natural born servants sent out to get on obligations. When they fulfill these obligations, they normally return to the elemental chaos. Occasionally they might lurk around if they find like an atmosphere they like. Small numbers of liberated, in inverted commas, Mephits live in and around their native elements on the material plane. So I suppose if you're like a water Mephit or whatever, you get summoned, you do your mission, then as you're flying over, you're like, oh, well, look at that sea down there. You might decide to like hang around a bit and maybe cause a bit of mischief in the meantime. Now, it specifically says in this article that much like elementals, Mephits are typically unaligned, which is obviously a contrast to earlier. They've gone from being evil, albeit sort of like diet evil, to being just mischievous, to now apparently having like no real alignment at all, just being like simple messengers and errand boys. We then have a little stat block for the various different types of Mephit, and again we've got air, dust, earth, fire, ice, magma, mist, steam, water, and that's all we get. So we haven't got quite as many as previously now, which is a bit strange, but I'm guessing they were limited on article space. And you get like a little stat block in the 4th edition style for each of these. It says here that all Mephits gain regeneration, 5 hit points per round, but only under certain circumstances. So for the air Mephit, it regains 5 hit points whenever it starts its turn and has at least 1 hit point. If it starts its turn on the ground, its regeneration does not function. For a dust Mephit, if it takes cold or psychic damage, its regen doesn't function on its next turn, which seems a bit weird, but it's 4th edition, what are you going to do? Each of them has an at-will power, which is their claw attacks. They also have powers that tend to like recharge on like a 5 or 6, which are the sort of spell-like powers. So air Mephits have got like an air blast. It's a cone that blasts 3 creatures, can cause them damage, and it moves them a number of squares.
Have they got a breath weapon now?
They don't appear to have a breath weapon as far as I can see. I think that's sort of been rolled into the spell-like abilities.
They've got other sort of themed.
Yeah, so if we look at the magma Mephit, they have a molten blast, which is a recharge power, which is effectively the breath weapon. And again, they have this magma form that they can take on. There doesn't seem to be, beyond that, there doesn't appear to be an awful lot of background on them here. We're told like where they prefer to spend their time, which most of which is not surprising. I mean, Earth Mephits like living in caves and underground. Who'd have thought it? Magma or lava Mephits like lava. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science. You get you get maybe a sentence or two about the characteristics. So we're told Earth Mephits tend to be less cruel than many of the other types. They're curious about mortals. We're told magma Mephits are, again, not intelligent. They're sort of more brutish. Ice Mephits are mean. They don't have the emotions, as we said previously. But that's all we really get about them in 4th edition. And like I say, I'm sure there was some restraints due to like the limits on the size of the article. And I think these stats are perfectly serviceable for 4th edition. There's a nice little picture of each different type of Mephit, as well as they've reused some of the older artwork from earlier editions. So I think if you're playing 4th edition and you're looking for a sort of serviceable sort of set of stats, yeah, this article is going to do you fine. However, if you want more than that, it does seem that this article assumes you're going to know something about them already.
If you want more than that, don't play 4th edition.
After you've just been saying, like, don't take the mick out of different editions, I don't know how you can say that. And to be honest, I don't mind 4th edition that much anyway. But as we've often said, you know, it's whatever, all joking aside, it's whatever edition you guys out there enjoy. So I think the next time they crop up after 4th edition is, surprisingly enough, 5th edition. And if I remember correctly, they were in the main monster manual for 5th edition D&D. So why don't you crack that bad boy open and tell us what's in there?
Right after the Medusa again.
Makes sense. I'll
She's got her own page this time. Capricious imp-like creatures, native to elemental planes, 6 varieties, each one representing a mixture of 2 elements.
Well, it's nice they've actually explicitly stated that there, though.
Ageless tricksters, when they find their way to the material plane, they prefer to dwell in places where their base elements are abundant.
Makes sense.
Doesn't require food, drink, or sleep. We've got the Dust Mephit, the Ice Mephit, the Magma Mephit, the Mud Mephit, the Smoke Mephit, and the Steam Mephit. We have a little box out that says Variant Mephit Summoning. Some Mephits have an action option that allows them to summon other Mephits. Once per day, 25% chance of summoning 1d4 Mephits of its own kind.
So they've put it in more as an optional role rather than like, yes, this is an ability they all have, which I quite like. It's nice to see them sort of giving a bit of a nod back to the earlier editions, even if it's like an optional role. And that's something I've noticed they've done quite a few times in 5th edition. But obviously we know that with 5th edition, they were trying to sort of lure people back and go, oh, don't worry about 4th edition. Yeah, forget that. Oh, this corpse of a game that was sort of rolling up in a carpet and pushing it off the bridge in a car. No, don't worry about it. Yeah, 5th edition. We've still got it. It never left.
Again, they've all got their own specific
stat
block with breath weapon and an odd like innate spellcasting specific spell.
Yeah.
Some of them have false appearance, which is like a camouflage power. When it stays still, it looks like the magma.
Well, that's pretty cool. So, like, if you're like an ice Mephit, you can be like, oh, I'm actually just like a big icicle.
Which makes me think of, like, you know, the horror movies where you've got the, like, somebody's been standing in the background for ages, but it looked like they were part of the trees because of how their makeup's been done, or
it also makes me
whatever.
think a bit of, like, mentioning horror movies of, like, you know, when you see like a stone statue of a gargoyle, which, let's face it, the Mephits look quite like gargoyles, because gargoyles have got that whole demonic appearance going on, or I suppose I should say grotesques, really, but you know, in a horror film, when you see like this, what you think to be like a stone demon statue, and then like it like turns its head slowly, I could imagine like a sort of earth Mephit, like a stone style Mephit doing that. Or even like if you've got like your smoke Mephit, looks like quite shadowy. I can imagine it hiding behind a statue and like in the shadow of the statue, or like making itself look like a shadow. That'd be pretty cool.
So the other thing that they built on here is the when it dies, and this time they've each got their own specific description and a power called Death Burst.
Oh, nice. That's dramatic.
So, for example, the smoke one that you mentioned earlier, when it dies, leaves behind a cloud of smoke that fills a 5-foot radius centred on where the creature died. The sphere is heavily obscured, and wind disperses it, otherwise it lasts for a minute. So you kill one of them in like a dungeon in that closed-in space, that could be quite like a problem, particularly if you've got half a dozen more of them chasing after you. Ice one, just for something a bit different. When it dies, explodes in a burst of jagged ice that spikes everyone. And the lava one obviously does fire damage.
I was going to say, you know, you're talking about the ice one and it explodes in like jagged shards of ice. That reminds me of like there's a lot of like Final Fantasy style like computer games and things like that, where when you cast like an ice power, like the jagged bits of ice like go and come up like around the floor, which I think it's maybe they didn't do it deliberately, but it seems to me like that's possibly a bit of a cheeky nod to that, which I quite like, because again it's something a bit more dramatic, something a bit out of the ordinary. I've got to say as well, I know I'm not generally such a fan of like the newer styles of artwork, but I've got to say I think the artwork of the Mephits actually looks really cool. They all look like tiny little like characters, and although they look evil, they've got bat wings, they've got the massive hook noses and whatever, they look very impish. They still have almost like a bit of a cheeky sort of like mischievous vibe to them, rather than like out and out evil. Even the ice one.
Yeah, they are all like distinctly the same kind of creature, but also distinctly different from one another.
I quite like how they've put like so there's like a couple of them on each page. I quite like the fact they've put the smoke and the steam Mephit on the same page, because the smoke Mephit is very sort of dark and shadowy, and the steam Mephit is very sort of light and airy, so the colour schemes like contrast each other nicely.
I like that they've sharpened the lines on all of the other four, and then the smoke and the steam Mephit.
Yeah, they're all blurry, aren't they?
Hazy. Yeah, it works quite well. The first thing this got me thinking about when we were looking through them was the Mephistopheles character from the Faustus story.
Makes sense given the name.
Yeah. And I went down a little YouTube rabbit hole looking up things about Mephistopheles, and there's all these nutters that think they can summon real demons, and D&D has no truck with that and never has. But there was one bit that particularly like made me chuckle, I thought was worth mentioning, and that's that nobody really knows where the dude that wrote the first version of this story got the name Mephistopheles from.
Oh, right, okay.
And there's like various different possible routes for it, and the meanings, one meant destroyer, one meant slanderer, one meant not loving light. And then the one that really got me was lover of the sulphurous fumes of hell, so fart sniffer, which I thought properly summed up the D&D.
Yeah, that does seem very appropriate for Mephits, given they're described as like, you know, they're like basically bootlicking their bosses, but like if someone's smaller than them, they're suddenly like, oh, I'm the big I am. Well, I was going to say, in terms of how you can use them in your game, I think the most sort of obvious way is, as we've said in the various editions, they tend to be messengers, or they're sent out on a specific goal by a demon or some sort of like infernal overlord. So I think the easiest way of using them is they're sent on a mission or with a message that somehow complicates or intersects with something the player characters are doing. So if you're like, oh, I've got to go to, I live in this particular town, and a lava Mephits sent by an infernal overlord who's got a beef against that town and wants them to like start a few fires and burn it down, obviously you're going to be trying to stop them. So, but it's because Mephits are like fairly sort of low level creatures, it's a nice way of bringing in sort of elemental plane creatures and demonic creatures without them just like insta wiping the floor with like a lower level party. But potentially it could lead into something greater than that. So if you stop the Mephit, maybe their infernal overlord sends a couple more, then he gets the message, oh, Mephits just ain't cutting it, so he sends something harder. By that point your players are like higher level, maybe eventually they can rise and take on the infernal overlord themselves, and it's a nice sort of level adventure progression if that's what floats your boat.
So it strikes me that these could be quite a useful thing to have as like your really big bad guys minions as your players travel around a campaign world, because you've got quite a lot of different ones for all the different elements, different areas, whatever. So it means you can sort of make things feel a bit different, but I'm not quite sure how successful that would be, because after a little while a sort of 4-foot guy with wings and a pointy nose is a 4-foot guy with wings and a pointy nose, and whether he's made of dust or steam or smoke, does it really matter?
Yeah, and I mean, as we've said when we've been talking about the different editions, aside from a few minor differences in the sort of like powers they have and their sort of death moves, they're pretty similar in terms of like their raw sort of power levels and abilities. It's like you say, if someone's like shooting a breath weapon at you and it does X amount of damage, it doesn't matter if it's scalding steam or lava, really, does it?
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, as you say, you can flavour it to specific terrain, and obviously certain tactics might be more effective against certain types of methods, depending on what abilities they have.
So the other thing that stands out as being like sort of obvious to do with them is when you've got a high level wizard or whatever who's gone into the demonology thing, having a couple of Mephit NPCs who do what he's asked them to, like his servants, and you've got a nice range there to customise your demonic servants from when you've got your wizard to that kind of level. But you've also got to keep them busy, because otherwise they are going to go around and troll people, because it's what they do.
Yeah, now I certainly remember back in day, like certain types of like evil wizards, when they used the Find Familiar spell, they could get an imp, or I think it was called like a quasit, which is like a sort of a different type of imp. So I could certainly see if you wanted to maybe like slide a Mephit in there instead as a slightly more sort of mischievous but less overtly evil familiar, for like a sort of wizard who likes to dabble on the dodgy side of life, shall we say, then you could certainly do that. But as you say, you've then got the problem of, they're compelled to be loyal to you by the spell, but it's in their nature to like be trolling people and be mischievous, so you have to keep like a close eye on them or keep them busy to stop them causing chaos. And obviously, even if you're an evil wizard, every time you like go into a tavern or you go into a town, you don't want like your familiar sort of like setting fires and blowing things up and whatever. Now, I was going to say, this is one of the creatures I've actually used in a game like not too long ago. In one of my Middlelands campaigns, we had the players, when they were sort of in Great London, they found like a cult's underground lair, and they sort of tipped off the cult. They were on their way to get them. So by the time they got there, they'd cleared out. But they found the remnants. They'd been doing some sort of like summoning and demonic activity. And they found like 2 or 3 ooze Mephits that were sort of in there, who'd basically been lured in by like the scent of like the magical workings, had sort of like popped in there, and then we're like, oh, everyone's gone. Well, we can't get back, and they were like, oh well, let's just knock around here. Oh, look at this nice place we've got. Oh, it's all for us. There's no one else here. And I sort of did them as like a bit of a sort of comedy break in the game.
So they turned up late to the party and went round finishing everyone else's drinks.
Yeah, pretty much. But by the time the players turned up to this like abandoned lair, expecting to find all these evil cultists doing all their evil machinations, they found like all the cells were empty where they'd been keeping their sacrificial victims. All the altars were empty and whatever, and there were just like 3 or 4 of these Mephits who were like knocking around like they were lords of the manor, enjoying themselves and sort of like sitting on all the chairs and like smoking and talking in their high-pitched voices and giving it all of that. And like I say, it was a nice bit because they'd like fought their way through like a dangerous sewer to get there. Because I knew that the cult had already cleared out, but I didn't just want to have the players get there and be like, oh, everyone's gone, it's just empty. We fought our way through all that just for nothing. I thought, have these Mephits in there. It works in the sort of theme of the adventure. They managed to like wangle and bribe some useful information out of the Mephits about what happened to the people who'd left. And we got a nice little interlude where they could relax a bit, but they also got to like banter a bit with these NPCs and sort of like have a bit more of a lighter moment in the campaign. So I think Mephits can certainly work really well as like a bit of comedy relief. You know, if you want someone who's like I said, they're trying to be evil, but they're just not very good at it, and they come off as just like a bit comical. So they can definitely be used for that. If you want to inject a note of sort of like lighter relief into your game, but obviously you have to be aware of the effect that can have on the pacing of your game. So, can you think of any other ways that Mephits could be used in games?
Well, there's always that option of having one turn up and offer someone a Faustian deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing though, because I mean, I always imagine, you know, when a demon offers like, or a devil offers someone a deal, they have to have like the power to like make good on their sort of side of the bargain. And I just wonder, like, because obviously if you've got some massive like archfiend or whatever, and you're like, oh, give me eternal youth and I'll do this, that and the other, they can probably like grant you eternal youth. That's grand. Whereas I find it difficult to imagine like what a Mephit would be able to grant you. And actually like, I'll sell you my soul to burn down my neighbour's barn.
Until you've actually done the thing it wanted you to do and found out that bit of paper that you signed in blood
isn't worth anything,
then what does the Mephit care whether or not it can actually grant you gifts? It just wants to mess with you.
Conversely, though, we know that Mephits are used as messengers for, like, higher-up infernal overlords. What if, like, your infernal overlord sat there and he's like, oh, I've just had, like, a notification come in on, like, Demon Book. Says that someone wants to sell me their soul, and he's like, oh, I'm planning the Blood War. I haven't got time to go to, like, see this, like, 5th level, like, nobody to, like, take his soul. Oh, I'm going to send this Mephit along. Here's a contract, Mephit. Go along, get him to sign that. Come back. So you could potentially still have, like, the Mephit's, like, the middleman, effectively. He's the errand boy. So I could see that working. And, again, you can have a bit of fun with it, you know, if you want.
I hate to say it, but that story sounds like it'd be a lot more fun to play from the Mephit's point of view.
Well, who knows?
You know, your demon overlords told you to go and get this contract signed by this mortal.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, obviously you have to like house rule some stuff, but I'm sure as like a 1 or 2 shot, like playing a load of Mephits who've been sent out by your infernal overlord could be quite entertaining, particularly if like it was a con game or something like that. You know, maybe you have to see like who can collect the most like souls or whatever during the game. I could see that being entertaining as like a one shot or like a games on demand style deal.
Absolutely.
So that's been our episode on Mephits. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got anything you want to tell us about this or any of our other episodes, or maybe you've got suggestions for things you'd like to see in the future, you can leave us a message on SpeakPipe. There'll be a link in the description of this episode, or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Until we see you next time, take care, stay safe, and keep gaming.
Bye. You
What?
got something to add?
You got something to say about Mephits, Fanta? Oh, wow. I'm not sure about that. After all, who'd clean up all the mess?